The World Is Not Enough is Eon Productions' 19th James Bond film, and it hit theaters in November of 1999, right before the dawn of the 21st century. This was the third Bond film to star Pierce Brosnan, one of my favorite James Bond actors, and this is one of his most debated entries in his time as 007. I always try to start these reviews out with a little bit of trivia that I find interesting, and today's trivia involves the title itself. The World Is Not Enough, the title of this movie, is actually a translation of the words found on the Bond family's coat of arms, which was seen in a previous film, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I thought this was a fun little callback, as Brosnan's Bond even drops the line verbatim later on in the movie when speaking to Electra King. This film is the second to the last in what was considered the original James Bond film continuity, though fans have and always will debate the continuity of Bond films, as they embraced a much more loose timeline connection than the Daniel Craig era of Bond, or most other film franchises actually do. Original James Bond actor Sean Connery actually visited the set of this film to watch Brosnan record one of the film's action scenes, and Brosnan, in a tribute to Connery for receiving the American Film Institute's Life Achievement Award, joked that Connery asked Brosnan if they were paying him enough money to be doing those scenes. This is also the final appearance of Desmond Llewellyn's Q, who would tragically pass away in a car accident a few weeks after this film was released. He did reprise the role of Q in a commercial before his passing, but no more films after this one. And there is a pretty downbeat and sad yet respectful send-off to him in the film, regardless of the fact that nobody knew what was going to happen to him following its filming. So like always, I am here with my wife Jill, and again, I guess like always, this is the first time you've seen this movie. You've never seen The World Is Not Enough before.
But this is also the first time you've seen this movie.
Exactly, that's the change, is somehow growing up, I had seen the entire Brosnan era except this movie. But I think one of the most interesting aspects about this movie in general is probably Electra King. Female villains are not actually ridiculously common in Bond movies. They do happen, but at the top of the food chain villains are something that's a little bit more rare. And so it's actually debated who the primary villain of this movie is, which I thought would be something interesting to talk about at the beginning of the review.
She started out appearing as the Bond girl and has a very damaged past because she was kidnapped as a teenager by this terrorist named Renard. Kind of a driving force for the movie is like now he's allegedly after her, and you see a lot of trauma from her, like, oh no, I got stuck in a place, ah! Yeah,
and I got assaulted and all this stuff. But then later on the movie turns this on its head, and it basically says that during her time in captivity, she purposely seduced Renard, and then he fell in love with her. Although I think this would be statutory rape because they pretty much say that she was a teenager, like it's implied she was 16 or 17.
It's also implied that he thinks that he assaulted her.
Yeah, like he's proud of it.
Yeah.
When talking to M, he's like, you know, you left her with me, and you created her. They actually involved M deeply in the plot, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, they don't usually do that.
They kind of made it personal for M in this, which was a little unheard of, not unheard of, but not as common in this era of Bond pre-Craig, where she advised Sir Robert King, the father of Electra King, and he's a big oil baron, not to pay the ransom to save his daughter.
She studied law with him, so they were like good friends.
Yeah, and she basically told him like, hey, we don't negotiate with terrorists, we'll be able to get her back. And then they couldn't. And so basically she screwed that up a little bit. And then Electra King blames her father and M, and that kind of leads to the whole conflict of the movie. On the one hand, very clearly Renard took advantage of her because she was a teenager. So like whether she purposely did it or not, she was still a teenager and he was not. And then on the other hand, she purposely used that in order to seduce Renard, and now he works for her. So it's pretty dark. They gloss over a lot of that though.
This movie would have been better if they hadn't glossed over that part.
Oh, if they had gone more into the trauma?
Yeah.
Well, Bond tries to. That's one thing that's interesting to me about Electra King, is that he does psychoanalyze it and basically says like, you know, if you're stuck with someone for a long time, the only way you see getting out is this, and then you convince yourself in your brain, you fall in love with your, you know, with the captor. It's basically Stockholm syndrome. And everybody's like, shut up, Bond, it couldn't be that. You know what I mean? Like, M's like, how could you say that? And Electric King's like, how could you say that? But then it turns out it's 100% right.
Yeah.
So Bond was onto it, and I feel like his commentary was meant to be dark, you know, there, but they blow past it in the movie. And, you know, that's a criticism I want to come back to. I really like this movie. I don't actually have as many problems with it as some people do, but it does feel like there's a lot of different things they try and introduce that they don't fully commit to.
Yeah, I think that this movie didn't commit to as many things as it really wanted to, and I think that it makes it a little bit more of a worse movie than Tomorrow Never Dies.
Yeah, because at least Tomorrow Never Dies committed to its concept. The World Is Not Enough, I think this movie's very action-packed, and it starts out with 2 action scenes actually right away. So there's the Swiss bank shootout that I thought was a really interesting opening, just opening straight up on Bond walking into the bank, and it just drops you into the middle of the action. And then there's the boat scene on the Thames River near the MI6 building, which we're going to talk about a little bit more later. I actually really like how they show an attack on MI6, because in this era of Bond pre-Craig, which I always say pre-Craig because Craig is quite a bit different in a lot of ways, MI6 is often viewed as somewhat untouchable. They can get at 00 agents because, you know, they go out on missions and they're the ones out there. But MI6 is kind of like this, oh my gosh, don't mess with MI6. So to kind of see a Bond villain smart enough to use Bond to attack their target in the MI6 building, it kind of created a sense of vulnerability around the organization that I thought was interesting to do at this time.
And actually, that's why I think she was the main villain all along. I know it's debated, like, who the main villain is, but I think the reason it's her is because she's the one who pretty much planted all of this and made it so her father would die. And she even made it the same amount of money that was supposed to be her ransom as, like, a little FU.
Yeah, basically, which I thought was really interesting. The first villain, Julieta, who's also called the Cigar Girl in the community, is so minor and done away with pretty quickly, and they don't really mention her after.
Yeah, it was a little annoying because they made this really big deal about Bond getting into the stealth boat even though it's not ready, and him taking it on the Thames River, and it being like an awesome epic chase, and like there's missiles, and he cuts through the land, and he has to like go through a fish market, but then that girl that he's chasing just kills herself.
Right.
Like, immediately after the scene is done. Now you don't matter for the entire rest of the movie. We never bring her up again. It was just there to look cool.
And, you know, something I saw that we talked about a little bit is, I guess there was actually a deleted scene that implied that she and Renard were also lovers. It's interesting because that would have added another layer to Renard as an abuser. Because Renard is pretty much a very stereotypical generic villain. This would have actually added kind of an idea that Renard was using Julieta as well. That kind of manipulative nature around Renard would have been a lot better, but by the time we meet Renard, he's not charismatic.
Yeah, and he's not all that interesting, because they make this huge deal about him having the bullet in his brain, making him a stronger person because he starts not feeling anymore, and like all of his nerves are shutting down, so he's able to do things better than an average man. Like, he's able to push himself more, and they kind of make him out to be some sort of unstoppable powerhouse.
Yeah, like a super villain.
And then you meet him, and the only thing that he does to show that is he picks up a hot coal.
He got taken down, I would say, just as normally as any Bond villain.
Yeah.
You know, one of my biggest issues with this movie actually ties into what you're talking about. It's the subplot of Bond's hurt shoulder / dislocated collarbone. So in the beginning of the movie, in order to establish some stakes and show that Bond is not invincible either, they actually have Bond get hurt. He basically falls down the top of this dome and lands, and he dislocates his collarbone. Now, immediately, he absolutely manipulates this situation and, you know, does the business with the MI6 doctor, who was smoking hot, by the way.
Yeah, and he tells her, you know, maybe you should clear me and I might give you some goodies. And
right.
Then she got the goodies.
Right, exactly.
I understand why the Bond girls would, you know, have a bunch of sex with him.
Right.
But somebody like Moneypenny or the doctor, I feel like would just kind of get sick of him after a while because they'd be upset that he didn't commit to them or something, and that's a typical woman thing, is like, please commit to me.
Well, Moneypenny doesn't really sleep with him like...
Yeah, but she definitely likes him.
Right, exactly. Yeah, they flirt a lot.
Yeah.
I always thought it was fun. Copious amounts of violence and sex and political intrigue. I find it very interesting.
But in the movies, it's just meant to be fun. It was obviously meant towards, at first, the male demographic.
Yeah.
To be like, hey, look, sex and guns. To be honest, I think that is really fun.
So when we were watching this movie, you pointed out to me with the hurt shoulder. Well, I said to you immediately, I bet this isn't going to actually come up again.
Mm-hmm.
I was wrong. It does come up a little bit. But they treat Bond like he's invincible after showing he's not invincible. Like, remember when he's skiing down the mountains at full force and he's not wincing, there's nothing?
And that's like a couple of scenes later, like after he gets cleared. But then somebody grabs his shoulder. I'm sure it wasn't like a light grab, but he still acted like it was the most painful thing in the whole world. And it's like, wouldn't that also hurt if you were doing the whole like turning with skiing? Because that would hurt my shoulder.
That whole injury doesn't really slow him down in any combat scenes. Basically, Renard grabs his collarbone one time, like you said, and Bond mentions it to Electra King, saying like, oh, he knew how to hurt me and I only told you about it. But what's odd is the injury doesn't really affect him in any other parts of the movie. It conveniently affects him when the writers wanted to bring it up, but not when they wanted to have insane action scenes. And I think this is a huge missed opportunity to ground this movie. This movie tries really hard to be grounded in reality with the oil plot and everything going on. It was a very like 1999 movie of something that could happen in 1999. Could happen today too, but it was like the whole, you know, fossil fuels and everything. That was a big deal. But what's weird about this is that, not to always bring up Craig, but I think the Craig era of Bond, and I'm never saying it's actually better, I'm just saying it's different. One thing they tried to do with it is more deconstructionism. He ages like everyone else, he can get hurt like anyone else, and some people really didn't like that. They like, you know, kind of like superhero Bond. He's James Bond, you can't hurt that guy, he'll always bounce back. But like,
yeah, he's your Fallout 3 character after you level up all the way.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he's just this, he's like a Superman. And I think with the Craig era, they tried to kind of change that. And I'm not saying that they needed to completely disregard the Superman type Bond in this, but they tried to introduce the idea to do so. It's kind of like, well, what do you want? Do you want superhero Bond? Or do you want Craig Bond? When the writers bring up the injury subplot here and they seem to want nothing to do with it in half the movie, I honestly think they tried to do this to make Bond look human, but they didn't really know how to do it.
They only used the shoulder to have a foreshadowing to Electra, and that's it.
One controversial take we both had is we really like Christmas Jones.
She very obviously was put into the movie just to be another hot Bond girl.
Yeah, I know. I think we can acknowledge the flaws with Christmas Jones,
yes.
But I really like her.
I really liked her too. I thought she was very hot. Her acting wasn't like the best in the whole world.
No.
But it was very obvious that they had ideas there to make her an interesting character. But then they kind of fucked it up.
Sometimes her line delivery was a little wooden. From my understanding, she also wasn't used to this type of movie. We watched it behind the scenes, and Denise Richards seemed incredibly attracted to Pierce Brosnan.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
she was starstruck to be working with him.
Yeah, and
basically.
She said, oh, I think we have a ton of chemistry together.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really sweet. And you can kind of tell a little bit that when she's acting in the movie, she is a little bit nervous because she's with the hottest man alive.
Well, yeah, she was nervous and she seemed a bit enamored, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I think that, you know, the people who were actually recording the movie could have stopped it and said like, hey, let's do that scene again. It feels like they recorded each scene with Denise Richards in it 1 or 2 times, and they were like, you are hot. We're good. No one's gonna question that. I don't agree that she didn't have any chemistry though with Bond.
A lot of her scenes, she's with him, but she only shows up every once in a while. Like, she shows up when you first meet her, and then she kind of goes away for a little while, and then she comes back after you find out Electra is the villain. And then there's not really a whole ton left to do, except there's this one part where they ask her, oh, could you like defuse this bomb? And then at the very end of defusing the bomb, Bond is like, actually, don't defuse the bomb. I know you just did all of this work, but let's let it go off because I have a plan now.
Yeah.
And it kind of just made it so she had nothing to do and looked a little bit stupid, even though she was an extremely smart character.
They didn't introduce her early enough. You know, I think that when you tried to push Electra King, They wanted you to think she's the Bond girl. But then when she's outed as a villain, there's not a lot of time left for Christmas Jones to actually shine. And I think that this is a problem that could have been solved. You don't necessarily need to have this problem because Wei Lin had plenty of time to shine in Tomorrow Never Dies, even though Paris was there.
Yes. I completely agree, and I think it's a shame because I really liked Christmas Jones, and I thought her character could have been extremely interesting because she's one of the smarter ones out of the Bond girls. Not to say, like, Natalia and Wei Lin weren't smart, but, like...
No, Natalia is also pretty much pretty high up there, too, yeah.
But, like, Christmas Jones is a nuclear scientist, and I think that could have been a huge advantage to Bond in winning if they'd have written her to have more to do.
You actually pointed out to me that she looked a lot like a live-action version of Lara Croft.
Yeah, and if they'd have given her a little bit more training on doing some of her stunts and some more action scenes and put her into stuff like that, I think she would have been really awesome and, like, reminded me more of a Lara Croft because she has the look.
That's true. Yeah, I think that overall they just kind of said her entire thing was smarts, but then they didn't use the smarts. And I think that's a problem. One thing we both liked about this movie, though, was the inclusion of Zukovsky from GoldenEye. MGM's made comments in recent years about how they view the Bond series as a series of series now versus just a series of movies. And the interesting thing about the Brosnan movies is it seems like they were actually really trying to head in that direction. There are callbacks to previous Bond films and continuity from before Brosnan was around, like, you know, the family crest. But also you're able to enjoy it as just its own thing, starting with GoldenEye if you want. I thought that that was done really, really well. I mean, there are other places in the Bond franchise where it's like that too, where you can just kind of hop in and watch it and enjoy it. But I thought that they did a really good job of almost doing a self-contained yet connected to the other continuity with this. And I think that with Zukovsky, though, it's just kind of a shame how he died. It would have been interesting to see him back in Die Another Day. He did have an iconic death. It's a good scene. He's directly responsible for Bond winning, but he was such a likable character, it was kind of a shame to see him go. And one thing we both thought about while watching this was that Desmond Llewellyn's Q wouldn't be back after this. So in a way, it's a bit heartbreaking to lose both characters in one movie. Even though Q doesn't die on screen, it's the actor who sadly passed away outside of the movie, and there's no way they could have known that.
Yeah.
It just came off kind of sad.
I think one of the saddest things, too, about Desmond Llewellyn is his very last scene in the movie is Bond asking him about if he's retiring or not. And then he kind of gives a cryptic answer where he's like, never let them see you bleed, and also always have an escape plan. And then he escapes through the floor while staring at Bond.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like a goodbye. And when you think about it in terms of that was his last scene in the movie, and now he's not in any other Bond movies because he sadly died, it's really sad.
You know what makes it even more sad that I really liked? Is those characters always kind of shit on each other. You know, like Bond would make fun of Q, and Q would make fun of Bond. And it's not like they're best friends or anything like that, but they do care about each other. They don't want to see each other, like, die.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that was interesting is when R is introduced there, and he's sort of like default factory settings Q from way back, you know, where, like, he's not really connected to Bond. He's a little bit of an asshole. And you see Bond and Q kind of, I don't know what word you'd say other than Bond over making fun of R in that scene where, like, Q pulls the jacket string and then R is trapped in it and Bond makes a joke about him and Q laughs and they find it funny. And then they kind of have this moment where, like you said, Bond says, like, hey Q, you're not retiring, are you? You know, like, you're not leaving, are you? And then that's kind of when he has a heart-to-heart, and then that's the last thing he says to him. It's incredibly sad for the movie it's in, and I guess it would be less sad if Desmond hadn't passed, but knowing that he does, and that his final words to Bond are basically, like, they share a laugh, and then he says, like, I did my best by you, goodbye. It's really sad, actually. Like, it's actually really sad.
And they didn't plan it out. Like, nobody had any idea that he was gonna die. And I guess that's kind of the problem with Zukovsky dying is, like, I know they didn't know that Desmond Llewellyn would die, but I think it's kind of a shame to also lose another iconic character that was really interesting, because you could have easily brought him back in the next movie as well.
I do think that with this movie, to kind of move into something less sad, Bond's car felt wasted to me again. It did not in Tomorrow Never Dies. So this is kind of like an every other Brosnan movie problem, because there's a huge car inclusion in Die Another Day. So it's like every other Brosnan movie wastes the car.
And there was an awesome car inclusion in Tomorrow Never Dies.
Yeah, so it goes like wasted car, GoldenEye, Tomorrow Never Dies, well done car. Wasted car, The World Is Not Enough, Die Another Day, whatever you want to say about it, the car stuff is well done.
Yeah.
I actually got a fact wrong, I believe in the GoldenEye review or the Tomorrow Never Dies review, I don't remember which, where the scene where they saw the car in half and stuff like that, it was kind of a repurposed idea from GoldenEye, which is why that car felt wasted in that movie. It ended up getting cut. I was talking to one of my friends about this. Shout out to Seth, my resident Bond expert who helps me write these scripts. And he was talking about how they pretty much used essentially the same type of car, and they tried to sort of pay off in a way or pay homage to that scene that was going to be in GoldenEye. The problem is the car, again, only matters for like a minute of screen time, so even though you're trying to pay off a little bit from GoldenEye, the car, again, doesn't matter, so you might as well have not bothered.
Yeah, it was kind of a shame. And every single time they show the car at first in the whole like Q scene, they're like, make a big deal about it. They're like, oh, look, it's got some awesome stuff on it. We're gonna use it. It's gonna be cool. And then he doesn't use it. And I guess that was kind of one of my problems with this movie, is they didn't really have any cool gadgets that he used throughout the movie. Like in GoldenEye, he used, I'm pretty sure it was GoldenEye where he used that belt and he used the exploding pen and stuff like that. And it was really cool.
I will say, not to correct you, he does have the X-ray specs, but they only matter for about 15 seconds and mainly to look at hot girls' lingerie.
And they're very forgettable because it was just to look at hot girls' lingerie.
And then he has the jacket he uses once, but these are all very quick scenes.
Yeah, and I wish they would have maybe put a little bit more emphasis on a couple of the gadgets he was going to use and maybe had them in the movie a little bit more, or at least had the car in the movie a little bit more.
It felt to me, again, like a lack of committing.
Yeah.
You know, so like you wanted to have the gadgets of the previous Bond eras, but you wanted to be this down-to-earth James Bond movie, you know, but they couldn't decide, do you want to be a deconstruction Bond movie where Bond doesn't use outlandish gadgets, or do you want superhero Bond where, like, at the last moment he can pull out an exploding pen and save the day? I don't think they could really decide which Bond they wanted. We both thought it was kind of a wasted opportunity, by the way, that Electra King died first before Renard. I was actually reading that there's several different endings for The World Is Not Enough in terms of the book and the movie. The book had her get shot and sing like a haunting song on her deathbed, sort of mocking James Bond or at him, which would be really dark. I'm not really sure if that fits in this movie or not, but it might have added something here. At the same time, Renard really isn't used in this movie much at all, and he's essentially a glorified henchman. You kind of pointed this out too. He's supposed to be a supervillain, but like, he doesn't really matter.
Yeah, and he doesn't really have a whole lot of motivation. Like, I still don't know what his motivation was.
He was just an anarchist, and he was sexually frustrated he couldn't sleep with Electra King more because he couldn't feel his penis.
Yeah, and
that's what it felt like.
So, like, what other, like, motivation did he have to do all of this stuff? It's just kind of...
He was sexually frustrated and an anarchist. That's it.
It's just kind of shallow and weird.
It's weird because, like, he's portrayed as this really dark character mocking to M, basically about how he assaulted Electra King and turned her evil. And then he's such an idiot that he gets absolutely obliterated by an injured Bond and a nuclear physicist girl after the movie made a big deal about his condition making him basically Superman.
Yeah.
And Renard couldn't measure up. Like, there's even a scene later on where they try and sleep together, and he can't get it up because of the wound in his brain. Like, he doesn't feel anything.
And she's all grumpy, and he's like, is Bond better at it than I am?
And she was like, yeah.
But it's also hard to believe that he really even cares about Electra.
Yeah, he's like such a psychopath.
Because he's a psychopath, and because he kidnapped her at first. And it was implied in, like, if that Julieta girl, her scene would have still been in there, it was implied that he did the same exact thing to her. So did he ever love her either? I think you could have done this very well by making him a charismatic character. By the time she called Renard, there was no point for him to shoot her. So either way, he just shoots her. At least if you had him shoot her before she called Renard, he is shooting her to try and prevent a nuclear meltdown that would kill 3 million people. Otherwise, he just shoots her out of spite. Yeah.
Like, there was no reason for her to die. And another actual discarded idea was that she would be in the hospital and he'd visit her at the end in custody. But that was seen as too downbeat. I think that would have been an interesting ending. But instead she calls and then she doesn't finish the call because she's like, actually, you wouldn't kill me. You'd miss me too much. Yeah, but she's like, Renard, you need to do it. And then he shoots her. But Renard still does it because he heard, I need to do it or whatever. So it's like he still just shoots her in cold blood. She could have been arrested. And there was proof of what she did, and M knew what she did.
Yeah.
But, like, he was like, nah, JK, bang.
I don't know why he did that.
That was a weird out-of-character moment to have, like, a I never miss, like, you know, like a one-liner. But usually Bond isn't the executioner just because. It's not like he goes out of his way to kill them. But, like, having him go out of his way to kill her, it felt weird to me.
It did feel a little weird.
She deserved it, but it felt weird in the context of who the Brosnan Bond is.
I kind of think it's just because he was a little grumpy because his perfect little neck almost got messed up.
That's true, yeah. He's like, I'm gonna have to pay for a lot of chiropractor visits, bitch. Bang! Just took her out. And even M walks in and she's like, oh, what the fuck? You know what I mean? I wanted to mention a couple of facts from the making of. Real boats were used in the opening boat chase. These boats had to be specially modified multiple times to make tight turns, and Brosnan was actually in the boat a lot of the time as well.
Yeah, that was really cool.
He just wasn't the one doing the barrel roll and
true.
some of those big stunts. But
he was the one in it for the dive when he had to hold his breath and go under.
Yes.
Yeah, and I thought that was really cool.
I thought it was interesting. And director Michael Apton actually said that he believes one of the most special things about Bond was the idea that it felt real due to stunt work being real, which is why I think that they put the most work into stunt work in this movie. I liked the stunt work a lot in Tomorrow Never Dies, but there was that very obvious fake arm thing with the motorcycle chase.
Sadly, I'm the one who pointed that out. You never noticed that before.
I don't really look for that stuff.
And you always thought, like, this is really cool, and then I ruined it.
Well, it's still a cool scene, but, like, it's very obviously fake now.
Sometimes I'll notice something and I think, that's a little weird, and then I'll keep staring at it.
You know, to give Michael Apton credit, by the way, despite having some problems with this movie and it being our least favorite out of the 3 we've watched so far for Brosnan, he grew up a fan of James Bond. Apton was a fan of Bond, and he wanted to do right by it and deliver what people wanted by making the movie, and I do think that this is an underrated Bond movie. We have more problems with it than the previous 2, but it's still a really good movie, and it's one of the better action movies out there. And most Bond movies, I can say that with.
I agree.
You know, most Bond movies, they have real stunts, they have people who care behind them, and at the very least, those things shine through even when there's problems.
That's something I like the most about the Bond movies, is I really like how special all the stunts are, because when you watch some other types of movies that are action movies, they have stunts in them, but you just kind of always think, yeah, that's a little fake.
Yeah.
But with the Bond movies, they're really memorable.
Yeah, they're done very well, and there's a reason why a lot of Bond actors get injured doing the role, unfortunately. We have problems, but, like, people act like this is a bad movie. I don't really think that. I just think it's not the best Bond movie. In conclusion of this movie, and, you know, Jill, I'll ask you too, I think we both really like the movie. It's just our least favorite Brosnan one that we've watched so far. When we get to Die Another Day, that might change. You'll have to see.
But Brosnan still carries it very well.
He does, absolutely. And this movie did have the potential to be the best of these 3. You know, it very much tried to take itself seriously. It tried to ground its plot in reality without going too far into outlandishness. But there were a lot of ideas they didn't really want to commit to, which we already said. They wanted injured Bond and a superhuman villain, but neither of them actually end up really mattering that much. They wanted a female villain, but then she's killed off before the actual full-on climax, where he, you know, is on the boat.
At least she got her full-on climax.
Multiple times, you know. And they pretty much left the main villain dead, you know, and then her henchman was alive, and then Bond just had to go after the henchman. And they also wanted to introduce a second Bond girl again, like Tomorrow Never Dies did. It felt like they did that because they, you know, saw the previous movie did it, and they're like, we gotta do that now. But they didn't give her enough screen time or things to do in order to make her, stand out. And despite the fact that Denise Richards was drop dead gorgeous as Christmas Jones and probably had one of the best ending lines of all time, I thought Christmas only comes once a year.
I thought that was pretty funny.
Only came once a year. From Bond, you know, being said at her, which I thought was hilarious.
Yeah, they were in bed together, by the way.
Yeah,
it was really hilarious.
That was really hilarious. We will start laughing so hard. You know, despite that, and it's such an iconic ending. It's really well done. And I really love the opening, but a lot in the middle felt like ideas where they didn't know where to take them. I think we both really loved the movie still, and something I didn't mention is I love that iconic white suit for Bond. But there's a lot of stuff that I think could have been done better, which isn't something I say about GoldenEye or Tomorrow Never Dies. So I'm not someone who's very hard on the Brosnan era. In fact, I think I give it a lot more leeway than most people do, with Tomorrow Never Dies being one of my favorite Bond movies ever. But this movie I really like, and I hate the term mid, but it feels like kind of a middle-of-the-road James Bond movie. It's not bad, but it's not outlandishly good.
I think it's a big shame too, because I honestly think that this one had the best song.
Yeah, The World Is Not Enough was such a good intro.
Yeah, it's a really good song. I thought it was better than all the other songs by far.
Yeah.
And then they kind of messed it up.
It's a big divide in the Brosnan fandom of Bond. It's like you either love Tomorrow Never Dies and you think that The World Is Not Enough was a little bit of a letdown, or you thought the Tomorrow Never Dies was a little bit of a letdown because you watch Goldeneye and then it's Tomorrow, and then you really like The World Is Not Enough and you think it's underrated. Mm-hmm. I think we're in the first category. Mm-hmm. I think we love Goldeneye, we love Tomorrow Never Dies, and we really, really like this movie. Mm-hmm. Let us know what you think in the comments down below. Did you like this movie or not? Please be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. And if you've stuck it out to this point, the channel memberships are up now. If you want to help support the channel, down below there is a join button. You get a lot of goodies for doing that, including exclusive videos depending on the tier, early access to videos and stuff like that as well. That helps us out a ton. And also, my wife Jill, who was here with me today, has a wonderful shop, enchantedglamour.com, magicaljill.com, or degeneratej.com, any of them, and it's GLAMOR.com.
I also have my own YouTube channel.
She does have her own YouTube channel as well, which is Magical Jill, over on YouTube. So there's a lot of great stuff on her shop, including one-of-a-kind comic book resin pieces from recycled comic books and manga, and actually really good jewelry. And so I hope you'll check that out and her channel. The links are in the description down below. Have a fantastic day, everyone, and as always,
stay shui.